Well, it's not working. Yeah, right, yeah. Oh, I think you're right. Oh, cool. Yeah. Because it's not like if I was doing hop on water for 2 minutes, like a lot. Right ahead, bye.
Did she get rid
Is everything all good?
Yes.
Okay. If you need me to just not start right at 1:30, just let me
Got
know.
it,
But
got it.
if it's all good, I'll start right at 1:30.
I need to just start it coming up at you. So give me like 2 minutes and then you can start.
Sure. Yeah. Just give me the thumbs up. Sorry?
Is this YouTube or?
That's a good question. Actually, I don't know what she set up with.
It's a stream, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I think it's just probably embedded in our website then.
Okay, so don't stand this close.
Yeah. I'll ask her. I actually don't know. I'm new to this.
Warriors. No. Let's just. I've been there a lot of times. I don't know why you haven't gone there. Well, I think I can spell. I know you're not wrong, but like, you always sit there. That's the big thing right now. Yeah, well, it's you're going to be satisfied. I'll just drink that.
All right. Can you hear me now? Perfect. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to the Communication Department's Spring Semester Colloquium. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce our speaker for the afternoon, Dr. William Chopik. Dr. Chopik is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology here at Michigan State and earned his PhD in Personality and Social Context at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor in 2015. Dr. Chopik has provided a number of incredible contributions to the field of relationships and more specifically how they develop over time. His paper in Social and Personality Psychology Compass efficiently reviews how attachment security changes throughout a lifespan and provides strong directions for future research. Dr. Chopik also has a paper in Teaching of Psychology where he implemented an interpersonal relationship strategy known as the Fast Friends procedure in a remote classroom, finding great outcomes among students. This afternoon, Dr. Chopik will be presenting his work on measuring non-human animal personalities and how much of our measurement is influenced by environmental characteristics and our own characteristics as owners. I'm super excited to hear about this work, so without further introduction, please join me in welcoming Dr. William Chopik.
Great. Well, thanks so much for having me today. I have a great deal of affection for the COMM College and all the various departments. I intersected with many of you over the years, and it's really great to kind of formally come here and share some of my research. So the truth is I don't usually do what I'm going to be talking about today, but we do a lot of different things about close relationships. We try to study them from multiple units of analysis. So for example, we have a bunch of papers looking at how cultures differ in psychological characteristics and how they approach relationships, but also how relationships have changed over time, say how they're different from 50 and 60 years ago versus what they're like now. We also have some research looking at how relationship contexts affect health and happiness and cognition. Well, most of the time it's what is it about the person you're married to that's driving you insane or making you sick or making you do a lot of unhealthy stuff. And then we also look at how your personality or individual differences, how individuals differ, change across the lifespan over really long periods of time too, like sometimes 50, 60 years in your life. And then finally, we also do some work on neuroendocrine functioning. It's actually what my original training's in. So I know a lot of weird stuff about testosterone and estradiol and progesterone. I don't really use any of that knowledge now, but I thought I'd mention it that's stuff that we know. So today is about animals, though, actually. So, and the funny thing is, when I was invited, I thought, oh, well, this will be a really great opportunity to load a presentation full of cute animal photos to get people on my side. I think it's such an amazing talk. But then I thought, I'm talking to a group of academics, they're professionals. They don't need to be won over by a bunch of cute animal photos. You're not children. You live your life every day. You know where animal photos are. You ever heard of the internet? I'm not going to infantilize you and show you shiny animals. You can go home and do that. Or at least that was the plan, because then a friend sent me this magazine spread of people who look like their pets. And then, I thought more and more about it, and I started seeing it everywhere. Like people like, no, they're pets and they're animals. And then basically the dam just broke, and I'm really, really sorry. Now, this talk took like 48 hours to make. I thought it'd be like 2 hours. It'd be really quick. Here's a dog with a bow tie. Like, that's not allowed. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't know what's going on in the world right now. This turtle, that leaf's too big. It can't eat that leaf. Anyway, it just took forever, and I'm really, really sorry. So I initially tried to be super professional, but I'm sorry. The rest of the talk is just loaded with animal photos and GIFs. So I hope you can forgive me. Okay, keep going. As hopefully this introduction has proven or shown you, animals do have this really present part in our lives, both personally, but then also in the broader world. Like I said, if you've ever encountered with the internet, you've seen animals before, but then also pets occasionally get injected to, say, political hemispheres. And again, part of it is speaking to just how central pets are to people's lives. A lot of times people will list them as members of their social network. They'll rearrange their whole lives to take care of their pets. They'll take out great financial stress to take care of their pets. So there is a sense in which it is really, really important to a lot of people. People will know celebrities like Lassie, which I'm aging myself now. So Lassie was this TV show, or Lassie would communicate with humans when Timmy fell down the well. Okay, I don't really know much about Lassie, but that's the general gist. But again, when you ask people just explicitly, what do pets mean for your personal life, they'll readily give you a lot of just effusive praise of their pets. So we did a mixed method study of pet owners during the pandemic, and we asked this question, basically, if you wanted to kind of tell us a little bit about your pets and their role in your life during the COVID pandemic, tell us a little bit about them. And they would say things like this. They would say, I'm studying for the MCAT right now. My dog has been a really great study buddy who sleeps in the bed while I study. My cats like to sleep beside me, cuddle up on my lap, sit and watch TV, lay beside me while I work from home. We got 2 new kittens, so maybe you saw this. There's a lot of adoptions during the COVID-19 pandemic, especially early on. Shelters often ran out of pets. They brought so much joy, so much love and entertainment to the whole family. Having a pet that doesn't know what a pandemic is and behaves as he normally does brings a sense of normalcy. He's certainly happy that we are home all day. And then they bring a lot of joy in our life. Cuddling them lowers my stress. So the really interesting thing is when you ask people in an open-ended fashion, they readily say things like this. But then the really surprising thing is when you look at quantitatively people who own pets versus not, you actually see that they look pretty similar psychologically. And I think that surprises a lot of people. So this is a forest plot where we compared a bunch of different indicators of mental functioning, like how happy people were and how lonely they were. And again, when you compare pet owners to non-pet owners, they don't really differ much. They're a little less depressed, but the effect is so close to zero that it's not super meaningful. And I think people are surprised by this. And if you think about it for a little bit, it's not super shocking because, there's a sense in which a pet won't solve all of your life problems. In fact, they might inject a few additional ones. They won't get you a better job. They won't double your income. They are certainly nice to spend time with, but people who don't own pets, it's not like they're losers who have no sense of joy in their life. They just do other things that bring them happiness. So the really interesting thing is that our paper is actually pretty consistent with other systematic reviews that have tried this. So this particular review is just among studies during the COVID-19 pandemic. And, out of the 54 articles, only 17 found that there was an unambiguously positive impact. Other 19 studies found mixed, 13 found none. And 5 studies found that actually owning pets caused more stress. A lot of times people would cite, hey, I don't know if like my pet could get this infectious disease that's going around. So the really interesting thing is that this is pretty much the last time I'll talk about humans in the talk. So from this point forward, it's enough about you. It's all about the animals. So, naturally we were just fascinated by kind of pet psychology and how humans interact with them. The impetus of the projects that I'll talk about is that my friend Jonathan adopted a dog, and he noticed that it's very different than his other dog. And he kind of remembered back to how his dog changed from being a puppy. And he's like, yeah, it's so weird. These animals they change really dramatically, or they're just so different despite being similar breeds. And I said, there's probably some research on that. But for today's talk, I'll actually take a step back and talk more about kind of the historical development for how people have traditionally tried to study these things. So again, how would you go about studying pets, their psychology, and how humans influence them? Well, part of the problem is actually trying to figure out how to measure that thing or operationalize that thing. So it's actually really hard to measure and assess things that can't kind of conceptually give their inner states. So it's like, oh, you feel really down today. Did you read the New York Times? Or pets are not as kind of forthcoming with their psychological states. But if you know anything about psychology, you know that there's actually some historical research on dogs and how we've used them. So if you've heard of Pavlov, the idea that we try to condition people and dogs to respond when stimuli are presented, like say ringing the bell, and you feed the dog, and then afterwards when you ring the bell, the dog will drool because it's expecting food. So there's a sense in which the history of psychology naturally just intersects with animal models, and there are people who still do this work to this day, and they work here too. But broader than that, people have done and examined this question from all sorts of different perspectives. So, for example, there's something called the puppy test, where they kind of try to measure psychological and physical states of puppies. So what they do is they'll draw a box on the ground, or a series of boxes, and what they'll do is they'll pick up the puppy and put it down, and then they'll basically just measure how much the puppy jumps around from box to box, what's the percentage of time the puppy stays in the box. And the more and more which it's rambunctious and jumps around, that means that the dog is kind of just energetic. So, you might think that that's silly, but it's actually not that different from how we test human infants. So we place them on the ground and see how they approach ledges and edges and kind of navigate space. So that's called the puppy test, and that's actually one of the earliest measures of dispositions on dogs. It's basically how rambunctious are they. But beyond that, there's an entire field of genealogy research. So the thing about dogs is we can actually track their heritable traits because we know who their parents are, who their other dogs of certain breeds. And we'll know way more about the genealogical history of dogs. And then there's also a sub group of the field that'll study service-related dogs. Basically, how do you train animals in service of humans? So this could be service dogs of all different types, dogs that work in law enforcement, dogs that are companion animals, dogs that can judge your blood sugar levels. So all of these are kind of trainable characteristics in dogs. But when it comes to measuring a dog's personality, here's where we kind of ran into trouble. So like I said, there's the same difficulty that you run into where you can't ask a dog like how neurotic it is or if it's a narcissist. Like it'll give you an answer, but not one that you can really readily ascertain. So the question is, how do you go about studying an animal that can willingly give you answers to, say, a Likert type question? So what people have done is they've done a lot of different kind of systematic reviews and Delphi or consensus meetings where they'll get a bunch of experts together, say animal behavior experts, ones that specialize in particular breeds, anthropologists, ecologists, kind of how humans and animals have historically interacted. Some observational researchers who just look at like packs of dogs and kind of how they exist in the wild. And then you kind of have psychologists that are kind of comparative researchers where they compare animals and humans. So what they'll do is they'll kind of come together and they'll come to a consensus of all the different ways that dogs vary. So are they more anxious or not, or more rambunctious or not? But what people have done historically is that whenever you measure an animal's personality, it's you doing that as a human. And that's subject to all sorts of biases, frameworks, the way you see the world. a lot of times as humans, we'll kind of thrust our frameworks of life on animals. So a lot of times, like these Delphi meetings would kind of emerge with a bit of a human spin on them because it's kind of just necessarily, it's kind of embedded in your mind and your judgment. So part of how you evaluate that actually is you do some stress tests to see if you can accurately judge an animal's personality. So what they did is they did this experiment in the early 2000s where people brought their dogs into the lab at the University of Texas. And what they did is they had you fill out a personality measure of your dog. So it's like, how anxious is your dog? How nice is your dog? How kind of exploratory is your dog? And what they'll do is they'll actually bring your friend in and they'll say, how kind of exploratory and nice is your friend's dog? And then they'll bring in a total stranger, and the stranger will play with your dog for 5 minutes and then answer the same questions, okay? And they basically just try to see, do you all agree in the dog? So it's called consensus. It's done with humans too when they were kind of establishing a lot of the first instruments. And what they found is that there's actually a great deal of consensus. So this is you judging the dog owner. So that's the human that brought the dog in. And here is the dog on the right. And then this is the consensus or how much we agree. And what you'll see is that the correlations are actually higher than they are when you're judging the human, your friend, versus their dog. And again, the total stranger is agreeing with you. And if you've ever met a dog in your life, which I'm guessing some of you have, you'll notice that you can kind of get its disposition really quickly. So you can tell if it's really nervous, right, when you kind of walk up to it, or you can tell it's a lot of high energy. So there's a sense in which a lot of cases, if you saw the title of this talk and saw the abstract, and you're like, there's no way humans could judge a dog's personality accurately. They're actually better at it than they are judging humans' personalities. And you'll see that that's what they do with these particular ones. So these were some of the initial efforts, these consensus meetings, these kind of observer report studies. So they're trying and trying and trying and struggling and struggling and struggling. Until it kind of became the more kind of direct study of scientific research. So this is Sam Gosling at the University of Texas, and he was one of the first ones to say, hey, what if we formally applied a measurement model and an assessment exercise to animals? So what he did is he got together a bunch of experts again and just said, tell me everything dogs do, which is a crazy question. But they came up with all these different behaviors and different things and weird situations and traditional situations. And I'm sure you can appreciate this. He then gave that to a bunch of dog owners and subjected it to a factor analysis. Maybe there's some dimensional reduction you can do to kind of triangulate and get to a measure of measuring non-human personality. So he was able to successfully do this, and it's a little goofy. So if you know anything about personality psychology, maybe you know that there's this thing called the Big Five, where there's kind of a bunch of traits, and there's a lot of disagreement with it. Some people thought there were 16 factors. Some people thought there were 10. Most people think there's 5. There's a group who thinks there's 2, and then there's a bunch of crazy people who think there's just one personality trait that describes everybody. I can tell you more about those people. They're not very popular, but they have strong feelings. But they came up with a Big Five for cats and dogs. So I'll tell you a lot about dogs to begin with, and then the latter half of the talk will all be about cats. So they came up with a Big Five personality for dogs, and this is what people think are kind of the fundamental features of what dogs are like. So they think that fearfulness is a part of it. So there are some dogs that are more afraid of stuff, and other dogs that are pretty brave, and they'll kind of approach situations and people pretty willy-nilly. Aggression towards people. So here you see that kind of frame that humans will impose on animals. Basically, when we evaluate animals, we partially do it in their relationships to us. So they think that how aggressive they are to humans is a relevant characteristic. Some are really sweet, some are pretty aggressive and antagonistic. Activity and excitability, that's an extension of that puppy task, right? When you're jumping into lockout boxes and you're judging how rambunctious they are. Responsivity to training, which we'll talk a lot about today. Does your dog listen when you call its name? Do they tell you to stop when you tell it to stop? Will it kind of learn things? It's rooted heavily in the dog's cognition, which we'll talk a little bit about, but they think that that's a core trait. And then finally, aggression towards other animals, and you'll see that aggression appears twice on this list, and it's purposely thought to be separate. So there's a sense in which some dogs are readily trusting humans, but are very vicious towards other animals, and vice versa, where they're kind of aggressive towards people, but they kind of play along well with, say, other dogs or cats or kind of smaller animals. The cats' big five are totally different. There's very minimal overlap. So again, they just said, hey, what do cats do? And a lot of sarcastic people said nothing. But actually, they actually came up with a really long battery of different tasks that they do. So according to these kind of consensus meetings, cats vary on their agreeableness, where some cats are nicer than others. So that's a pretty reasonable thing, right? I'm sure we've all witnessed that. Some cats are more dominant versus submissive, so they'll kind of be more territorial, for example. Some cats are more extroverted, some are shy. Some cats, say, hide under furniture when guests come over. Some are very friendly and extroverted, so they'll walk up to people. Some cats are impulsive and others are more careful. So if you've ever had a cat that's trying to jump from, say, the counter to the top of the fridge, that's a very impulsive behavior, risk-taking behavior. Others are more kind of conservative. And then some are more anxious and some are more chill. So you'll see that some of those traits are present in humans, but some aren't. There are notable exceptions. So there's a human trait called openness to experience. It's kind of your like sensitive to aesthetic styles. With animals, it doesn't really make sense to ask them, how much do you like going to museums, or are you moved by the Young and the Restless episode we just watched? You know, there are certain things that are kind of specific to animals, and these are kind of the top big 5 traits that they came up with. But a lot of attention has been paid to this. So, you know, there's this broader measure of the big 5, but then there are what are called facets, which are kind of sub-traits within those broader ones. And again, this was part of the measurement effort. I'll tell you a little bit about a few of them. So this activity excitability, some of it is like their energy level, and some things are more social, like are they a good companion? Aggression towards animals. There are plenty of dogs that can be aggressive towards other dogs or not. Prey drive is if a dog kind of likes chasing squirrels and antagonizing rabbits and things. And again, that's different than, say, how it treats dogs or how it treats humans. There are these facets. So again, it's really, really hard to kind of come up with this. Dogs can't give you an answer, but you know, congrats, we got it. Okay, so we got this initial measure and this framework for thinking about personality. And then naturally, the next question and in the progression is, now that we can kind of measure these traits, there's consensus where people say, yeah, that's kind of what a dog is like. Our next question was, is it related to important stuff, which is an important thing to demonstrate, like if it's measurable, and then is there some validity to those things? And then does personality differ based on, say, the lifespan of the dog, or if you have a male or a female dog? And that's kind of what we did for these couple projects. And you know, the truth is that you as humans, your personality changes as well. So these are age differences in the big 5. So in the top left corner, that is your neuroticism level, where on average, most people get less anxious over time as they age. Not everybody, of course. There are what are called individual differences. Some people are anxious their whole lives. The middle one is how agreeable you are. So how nice you are as a person. Conscientiousness, this is really great. Over time, you become more conscientious. You're kind of on top of stuff. You figure out life and kind of how to succeed, getting out of bed in the morning, going to a talk on lunchtime instead of eating. So there is a lot of things in which you can withhold temptation to get ahead. So we tried to measure this process in cats and dogs. So what we did is we programmed a survey. It's a really fascinating process that I'll tell you about, where we're able to program a survey where people would fill out a measure and then it would auto send them a report about their pet. And I think people just wanted that information. So when I showed you the sample sizes, these are all just volunteers who wanted to know more about their pets. So about 1,800 people just took the survey for free in exchange for some feedback about their pets. I will say that, so there's about 1,800 or 1,700 animals in both studies. You'll see a few different demographic characteristics. About 14% of dogs had bitten somebody in the past, so that's a really important outcome for a dog. There are some municipalities where you might have to surrender a dog or maybe put a dog down if it were to attack a human. The cat study is fascinating. 60% were indoor-only cats. So indoor-only cats, their life expectancy is dramatically increased than traditionally just outdoor cats. I will say that this is a very huge study. So we have all sorts of data about cats' health, human insurance policies about cats, where the cat sleeps, by your bed, in your bed, outside the room, in a crate sometimes. So the really fun thing about this is that it's a really long survey. A lot of it's about cat health. But it's a really long survey, and at the end, we actually gave people this open-ended text box, and we said, hey, thank you so much for taking this thing for free and answering all these questions about your cat. We have the cat's name, we have where they got the cat. If we left anything out, could you just like tell us anything special? And there are some people, I'm not kidding, wrote like 800 words about their cat after having taken a 45-minute survey. And we just have this kind of free flow text information where they just gush about their cats. They tell us their name, why they named the cat the name, and the cat's names are amazing. You'd think they'd be like Oreo or Jeff, but it's like Queen Daenerys, Breaker of Change, Fluffiness of the Mountain, but we call her Fluffy for short. So it's really, really fun. And again, it kind of spoke to the fact that people really love their animals, and there's a sense in which when they were given the opportunity to tell us, they told us about them, and here's what they told us. So we started out by kind of just looking at how these psychological characteristics differed based on how old the dog was. So one bit of unfortunate news is that how fearful a dog was pretty constant across lifespan. So in other words, and this is cross-sectional data, but the idea is that if you adopt a dog and it's generally kind of a fearful dog, that's something that's more rooted in heritable characteristics. That's also a little bit true of humans. Anxious parents will have anxious children. But there's a sense in which that maybe doesn't dramatically differ across lifespan, but there are certain traits that do change across the lifespan. So, for example, if any of you have owned a dog for a long period of time, you'll notice that when you got it as a puppy, it was full of energy, and then as the dog get older, it doesn't move as fast, and it's a little bit slower, and it doesn't chase. It's a little tragic. It doesn't chase animals around as much. So again, that activity excitability measure kind of goes down over time. One controversial finding from that particular study was age differences in how responsive the dog was to training. So as a reminder, this is if you call out the dog's name, will it listen? Or if you tell it to stop, will it stop? How easy is it to train it new tasks? That's kind of this measure as well. And you'll notice that actually there's this curvilinear shape to kind of the fit regression line. And again, if you think about it for a little bit, there's this stereotype that you need to train a dog really early in life, otherwise you kind of lose the opportunity. And actually, again, if you've ever had a puppy, it's really hard to train it in general. And part of it is it's linked to its brain development. So brains of puppies are just not as developed. And then as it gets older, even like within weeks, kind of the brain development's pretty dramatic. So actually, when we ask people how easy it is to train the dog and if it listens, what we find is actually it peaks somewhere around after the age of 5. And then after which it's a little bit harder to train it as well. So on average, it's around 7.5 years in which like the dog was at full kind of capacity to listen to you. And after which, again, it kind of goes down. That's also linked to development. So just like older adults, kind of cognition declines and it's harder to kind of function in environments, remember things. So again, I say it's controversial because the title of this particular paper is called Old Dogs, New Tricks. And again, it's the idea that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but then this kind of violates that because when we ask owners, like, how easy has it been to train the dog, it's not the puppy years, it's actually a little bit later. We've looked into all sorts of different things. So again, these general dispositional tendencies, we tried to then link it to all sorts of things like how often it bit the dog. So again, just hearing a psychological description of your dog, knowing that, predicts kind of a 90% likelihood of biting if it's an aggressive dog. Responsivity to training, so that was associated with a lower likelihood of having bitten someone. And then we have all sorts of different things about kind of how close you feel to the dog. And, in general, dogs with more positive traits, like the kind of energetic, nice dogs, they tend to have pretty good relationships with their owners. And then another controversial thing about this particular study is that we measured people's personalities, and there was a correlation between what they said about their dog and what they said about themselves. And I say that that's controversial because we have no idea why that's the case. Because I told you, like, humans and dogs are very different. They do different things all day. I grew up with a husky, and I kind of just sat around and then ran for miles at night. You know, it's like dogs are just kind of different. But we came up with a few different explanations for why there might be a correlation between you and what you say about your pet. So one is what's called a selection effect. And it's the idea that when you choose a dog to be part of your home, you maybe choose it based on a few different characteristics, like is this the type of dog that needs access to a lot of outdoor space? Is it more active? Is it kind of a lap dog? Is it a dog that is kind of okay with long periods of being left alone? Doesn't work well with other dogs and animals. So there's a sense in which you as an owner partially choose a pet based on how it'll fit your lifestyle. So there might just be a correlation because like you're really sedentary and then you chose a dog that likes to lay around all day. So like there's a sense in which it might just correlate based on that. There's another process called selection, and it's the idea that once you adopt a dog, you fundamentally change its environment. So for example, say you're a super active person, you like going for runs and exercising. Maybe you then take the dog out with you and you say go for walks 5 or 6 times a day. There's a sense in which that type of behavior was correlated with dog personality in our study. Basically, the dogs were more active and excitable if the human was subjecting it to more physical activity. I will say all of these things are true with the humans you surround yourself with, right? So that when you look at your friends and your romantic partner, you partially chose them based on some consistency. Maybe you share values, maybe you share vibes, maybe you share personality. Maybe you being together for a long time has changed them psychologically. Like maybe you joke around a lot and then they kind of lighten up a bit, or maybe they make you more anxious or more serious. So there's a sense in which when you look at why dogs and humans are similar, there's a sense in which there's a ton of things in your environment that probably affect you in certain ways. And then there's a last one that we labeled broadly methodological reasons. So I started out this talk by saying, can we trust people when we ask them questions about their pets? And you may still be thinking no, even when I told you strangers can tell us about your dog. But there's a sense in which people love to anthropomorphize things. So they'll celebrate dog and cat's birthdays. They'll kind of have a very sophisticated food palette of the foods that dogs like and dislike. But there's also a sense in which we put them in situations that dogs would never freely choose themselves. So, this bottom, this is the dog part of the family. I'm sure it loves sunglasses, but this one's being actively mocked for its health condition, and I'm not in favor of that. I think that's really sick. That's so sad. It's unbelievable. And here's kind of this inspirational family photo where the dog is this silhouette in the background. So again, there's a sense in which we do foist psychological characteristics on pets, even when they're really not warranted. But again, I'd like to just remind you, they did this study where they brought in someone who knows dogs and knows all sorts of different dogs. And again, they asked that person about your dog, and they kind of were pretty accurate with what you were saying. So there's a sense in which, for sure, there's no reason why a dog wants to wear a tiara. There's something that you did to make that happen. But there's also a sense in which beneath that, there is this kind of latent accuracy that is present, that we can kind of accurately say, oh no, that dog's an anxious dog. I'd like to shift at this point to talk more exclusively about cats. So the rest of the talk is just about cats. How many people have a cat? Okay, how many people have a dog? Cool. How many people have a different thing? Okay, interesting. All right, wow. No one's got a llama. Someone said they had a llama. That was a different one. But there's this interesting thing about cats, and they hold a little bit of a different place in society and in people's lives. So, one pervasive stereotype about cats is that humans don't have much influence over them, and a lot of it's proposed like tongue-in-cheek, like, the cat doesn't listen to me, it'll do whatever it wants. There's this joke, dogs have owners, cats have staff, and you're kind of there to kind of always be, serving their existence. And we actually asked a bunch of people different perceptions about cats and dogs. So we asked about 2,000 people, we randomly assigned them to answer questions about dogs or cats. Some of these are pet owners, some of them are not. And we basically gave them a series of statements. And whenever you see an XXX, we replace that with cat or dog. So the cats are in yellow and the dogs are in blue. So one question was just, dogs are all the same. How much do you agree with that? People were more likely to say that about cats. Cats don't have personalities. People were agreeing with that compared to dogs. If cats did have personalities, their personalities don't change much over time. So, oh, my cat's always been an asshole. That's kind of the vibe. If cats do have personalities, their personalities don't predict anything important. A cat's behavior doesn't depend on their owner, how their owner treats them. So it's like resilient if you're a bad owner or a good owner, like there's nothing you can do. And the personality of cats and their human owners aren't similar in any way. Like, oh, I'm a joyful person, and yet my cat is this recluse who's full of anger and smokes cigarettes. There's a sense in which it's, there's this divorce between what humans and animals are like. But one part of the project was to disabuse people of that notion. So the funny thing is that, it's an organism that has to navigate different types of environments. There's a way in which, just like humans and dogs and babies and older adults, there's a sense in which they learn how to adapt to their environment. So cats do differ from each other. So that was a big part of this study. If you look along the top, those are those big 5 personality traits for cats. And on the left here was kind of a behavioral checklist of all sorts of different things that cats do. And they range from like really reasonable things to really funny things. So do cats direct calls or vocalizations, basically trying to vocalize as a way of getting your attention? That's associated with personality. The greener things are more positive, the red are more negative, yellow's in between. Touch sensitivity. Does a dog like to be, or does a cat like to be picked up? Some don't. Are they okay with being put in a carrier, for example? Fear of novelty, fear of unfamiliar, cats and dogs. Separation-related behavior, so like when you leave your apartment or house, does the cat like follow you to the door or greet you kind of when you return? That's basically attachment-related behavior, but seen in cats. Location preferences for resting and sleeping, where does it sleep? And here's where you get the funny stuff. So excessive compulsive self-grooming. So the cats lick and do this, so compulsive grooming. Inappropriate elimination, that's the technical term for peeing, urinating, and defecating outside of a litter box. That's the scientific term. Elimination preferences, again, that's kind of where they like to poop. And then this last one is something called crepuscular activity, and that sounds really strange, but if you've ever had a cat that does this thing where it just like randomly darts around the room, seemingly no provocation. Some people call them the zoomies for short. That's called crepuscular activity. Crepuscular is a word that means twilight. So cats are more likely to do it around sunset and night. So it's called crepuscular activity. So that's related to cat's personality too, not as strongly as some of these traits, but others. So part of it was just saying and acknowledging and trying to undo the stereotype that people have that indeed cats are different than each other and it is related to stuff. So that was the goal of this. Another thing that we got a little bit better at as we developed was visualizing the data. So this particular figure will kind of plot how cats' personalities differ across life. So that one cat silhouette represents 30 cats. And then you'll see that as we populate the figure with cats, again, each of these cats represents like 30 or 40 cats. We call this a catter plot. Let me explain the trick. Okay, so there's a thing called a scatter plot. And this is a cat. Okay, all right, fine. Okay, so one thing you'll see is that this is how impulsive a cat is. And again, if you've ever had a kitten, you'll know that kittens are very impulsive. They'll do crazy stuff. They're like their crazy friend from college. They don't know any better. Over time, though, they get less impulsive. Again, it's linked to, we think, brain development. As cats get older, they kind of become less impulsive. But then if you look all the way to the right of this figure, you'll see that the oldest cats are often the most impulsive. And this has been the biggest mystery of the project. We don't really know why this is the case. Again, like humans, like dogs, like all sorts of organisms, like as they age, there are kind of cognitive and brain changes that happen. But it's just really strange that cats that survive to a particular age are just psychologically different. That's true of humans too. Those are called selection effects in longitudinal research. It's like, who are you left with at the end of life? Maybe those people are different in some way than the people who started the study. It's true of cats too, apparently, where when they survive to advanced ages, they might just be different in some ways. So, but exactly what's predicting why cats live to a certain age, that's kind of the mystery. And the really fun thing is we had some really enthusiastic participants. They provide us with their contact information that we can maybe recontact them and ask, hey, how's your cat doing now? Are they still rambunctious? Are they still impulsive? Do you still love them? Do they still pee outside the box? Do they still run around the room at night? You know, we can all ask those questions now and really get to why kind of cats are psychologically changing over time. Again, the study is really overwhelming. There's so many things. Again, we find some correlation between humans' personality and their cats. So really nice humans also say that their cats are friendly and less impulsive. And then things humans did for 2 and 4 cats mattered. So, you know, one controversial thing in the literature and then also animal rights groups is that declawing cats is a really controversial behavior. It's controversial because some people think you're kind of taking away the cat's ability to defend itself. So actually, cats that are declawed are less agreeable and more neurotic. And again, it introduces this causal inference problem where, you know, as a human, did you declaw the cat because it was kind of unfriendly and maybe destroying things? Or maybe after you removed its ability to defend itself, it had to kind of preemptively be more aggressive so that maybe other animals didn't mess with it, kind of a wave. So again, like we don't really know the directionality of some of these things, but we know that that's what the correlation is. Living with other cats and cats that live indoors were nicer cats. Again, the directionality is interesting. You want to keep nice cats around with other cats, but there's also a sense in which exposure and familiarity with other animals maybe socialize animals. So again, that's that socialization effect where if it's able to coexist with other animals, and people have tried this where they merge cat households and they kind of get them to be friendly. There's techniques that help with that. So that's what we're trying. And then in terms of what we're trying to do next, we're, like I said, trying to model some of these processes over time and across different situations. And then modeling human and pet relationships in context, which is sort of the stuff like we're working on like this week and last week. So for example, there was a poll that got a lot of attention that asked a very, very simple question. Do you love your dog more than your partner? And I kind of just want to know what your thoughts are. So who says that the number is below 40%? This is great. Okay, nobody. How about 40 to 60%? Over 70%. Okay. The answer is 38, which might be lower than you think, but wait until you get these questions, okay? So I'm going to give a very abbreviated version of it, but I'll tell you the full context. So this one's a really great one. So they give you the backstory. You know, say you're dating someone that's going very well. You know, you seem like, oh, we could maybe have a future together. You bring them home, and for some reason, your pet despises them. You don't know why. And again, I started out this talk by saying you can't really ask animals how they feel about stuff. You know, it's their cologne. I know secret things about them. You know, pets kind of just operate based on vibes. How many people think it's less than 50%? So again, you're making a personal decision based on an animal that can't tell you anything about its opinion. How many think it's below 50%? Okay, a few people. It is nearly 70% of people who will break up with a partner. This one's even funnier. You are dating somebody and it's going well, and you decide to bring them home. And for some reason, they hate your pet. This is the human hating your pet. How many people would you consider dumping the human? Again, this is the human. And again, the animal probably didn't do anything wrong, but there's something about the human where they don't like the pet. How many think it's below 50% that you would dump that person? Below 70%. Okay, 100%. It's close to 80% of people will say, screw that person. They're done. And there's something about kind of pets and how they intersect with us personally that are shaping our opportunities. So I kind of showed you these in the first few slides. You know, when you ask people the role of pets in their lives, they'll say really wonderful things like they cuddle, they bring us joy when we're stressed out. And then, but they don't really affect your kind of happiness dramatically, or at least you're not dramatically happier than people who don't own pets. But there is a sense in which they're really shaping your life circumstances. So, you know, this is dating, and I brought this up because I study relationships, but there's a sense in which, you know, Matt, some of you are a little bit younger. If you say had a job opportunity on the other side of town that involved like an hour-long commute each way, and you'd be gone for 8 hours a day. You know, the fact that you have a pet, would that perhaps, you know, affect your thinking about whether or not to take that professional opportunity, or moving across state lines, moving to a different country where you might not be able to take your pet. So there's a sense in which like pets certainly don't like solve all of your life problems, but there is a sense in which they'll do things like kick your partner, I told you it was going well, and you kick them to the curb anyway, and it might affect, say, your professional opportunities. Have you ever left a party early to let a pet out or to make sure that you were able to feed your pet? That's another sense in which it's shaping your social opportunities too. So that's kind of what we're after, is modeling some of these things in kind of different contexts. And mostly it's just a general kind of goal of this research is to try to kind of extend the predictive power of personality and get a little bit in terms of how to measure it. So with that, I'd like to just thank you so much for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks so much. Any questions? Dave.
Thanks for this, Bill. I'll speak for Ellen here. I feel very seen in this presentation.
Okay, good. Oh, happy birthday. I didn't mean to insult you on the first couple slides of you looking like. Okay, sure.
So I'm curious, based on just some of the initial assumptions of doing some of this work, just because there's Ed Young's a journalist, but he wrote a book called An Immense World that has this concept called the Umwelt,
Okay.
which is basically like an animal's world. And one of the big like theses of his book is like, why are we even imparting human-like things on an animal's world? We don't understand a fraction of it. And it's like dogs see through their nose,
Right.
like for example.
Yeah.
Like talking about like some of the considerations early on, maybe like behind the scenes of doing some of this work of like, we're taking what we think is a very human-like thing, and doing some of this stuff with pets and why.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too because, especially with in kind of the animal hierarchy, anything below humans, a lot of them are driven by rewards and avoiding punishment. So like there are some people who think that that's the dimension that we should evaluate non-human animals on. Are they afraid of it? Is it a danger? And then is it rewarding, or they like to do that? And like you bring up the example of a dog's nose, in which it's seeking out curiosity, evaluating threats, and seeing if it's something that they should eat, and then they eat it anyway, regardless of what it is. So there is a sense in which, we're thrusting a lot of our worldview on dogs when we say that there's 5 traits instead of the 2 I just told you. I will say when you talk to people who just traditionally study pets, and these are kind of animal scientists where they'll study kind of social behavior in different kind of groups of animals. And I think that, like, I love Ed Yong, I like his reporting, and I think he's really smart and fun. But there's also a sense in which there's a ton of stuff about animals that we don't know and appreciate. So of course, a dog is driven by its nose, but then that's only partially true when you evaluate social behavior with other dogs, when it's kind of going around in a pack, or when you think of, I learned so much doing these studies. Bees have like an underappreciated social behavior, squid as well. There's studies of fish personality. Fish, there's like 2 domains. There's not 5 or 16 with fish. Fish are really simple, but squid are not. So there's a sense in which when you look across species, there are just different ecological circumstances that shape these psychological traits. So for dogs, a lot of it's driven by the nose, but there's other things too, like one controversial thing is like animals' ability to prospect into the future, which is usually seen as like a human trait. Like the fact that you worry about, I don't know, tenure and getting a job and dissertating. Like dogs don't really do that, but there's a sense in which like when you leave, it doesn't really know that you're going to work for 8 hours a day, but it's kind of evaluating its threat to its own life in the sense of like, is my human going to leave forever? Or is there a sense in which, oh yeah, they'll be back after 8 hours? So that's like a different thing too, in which like the human reality that we've imposed on dogs kind of changes what they think about and what they evaluate as threats. So yeah, I think that sometimes it's really simple, like stuff being driven by noses, but then I think there's often really surprising things that animals are capable of, stuff that we didn't know. And then that complicates the picture a little bit. And the problem is we just don't know enough about that stuff. So yeah, that's my impression of the Yang hypothesis. Yeah.
Thank you for the talk. So I personally raised a dog in my country, so
Okay.
I really enjoyed this talk.
Cool. What's the dog's name?
Kong.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Very important.
Yeah. It means bean in Korean.
Okay.
Because there's 3 beans.
Oh,
Or
like the
face.
top pause?
Yeah. So anyway, I really like your talk. And one of the things that kind of very interesting to me was that when people kind of attribute personality to or like when you try to measure those personality of cats and dogs, like dogs are mostly their personality more in relationship with or to humans.
Yeah.
On the other hand, cats were more like independent. Do you think it's somewhat related to our relationship with dog and cats? For example, maybe we seeing dog as our, I don't know, like subordinates or just friend,
Sure.
but cat as more like a lord cat.
Yeah, I buried the lead a little bit. So when I showed you those bar graphs where people thought that cats were less variable and that we can't control them, to play devil's advocate briefly, that could be true. When you think of the domestication history of all sorts of pets, dogs just kind of serve different functions in the history of human history, where it was kind of tied to particular functions and tasks, whereas cats are often just different. Cats do serve functions, and some species of cats have been used to serve different functions, but it's just kind of different. So then you think of, say, like breeding of animals and kind of transition of things across generations, it could be that cats are less controllable. So I'm willing to at least acknowledge that species, especially in their relation to humans, like there's a reason cats don't listen to us, but dogs do. And it might be attributable to their unique history with us. So, you can kind of pitch it as like we're kind of thrusting this human-centric worldview, but then also like dogs as a species have been radically transformed through human intervention. So they're different because of us. So that's why I sometimes think it's relevant. Or like biting a human, like the dog doesn't view like humans or other animals, but they view them in different ways. But like there's a sense in which that's an aggressive type behavior. But from the human's perspective, there's tons of implications. So if it bites another dog, that's different. But if it bites a human, that is a different thing. So, yeah, I'll accept that. Yeah, we foist our beliefs on dogs, but then also our relationships with dogs are different, and then the consequences of that behavior are also different. So, it is this kind of delicate balance of like, how do we stay true to the phenomenology of here's how these animals behave, while also acknowledging that hey, it's a human's world if you're a dog. So, yeah, say hi to COMM for me. So,
Thank you.
Hey, great talk. It's really cool. One thing that's just super anecdotal, but I'm just wondering if it's something that you've seen in your data. One of the things that I have noticed kind of with a lot of the people that I'm around, and I have talked to people about it a lot, so I feel like other people notice it too, is I feel like there's a huge shift, or there's been a huge shift in the last like 20 years-ish with how people see pets.
Yeah.
Like, for example, if I were to ask my dad about like his dog's personality, he's like, what are you talking about? It's a dog.
I've never thought of that before.
Yeah. And I feel like,
example where I brushing their teeth.
yeah, or like buying them refrigerated food, or like these. So
How many manicures did you give your child to dog, Dad?
yeah, like I mean, even me growing up, like until I was probably 15 or 16, our dogs just slept outside, and like I mean, that was just kind of the norm. So I'm wondering if when you look at your data, do you see effects of the respondents' age or the respondents' like social norms when it comes to how they evaluate these traits or characteristics in their pets?
Yeah, that's great. And part of kind of the culture of animals too partially reflects that. And it's really funny in the cat data set, we have a cat anthropomorphism scale. And part of it was to kind of get at these things. So the scale is hilarious. I'll email it to you if you're curious, but it's things like I celebrate animal milestones like birthdays and quinceañeras, which is just and just like you dress up and I buy a Halloween costume and I refer to it as grandbaby, which I feel like that's a covert thing where I told my parents that and they'd be like, "You're such a disappointment. Like, what's wrong with you?" But it's interesting. Like I mentioned it tongue in cheek, and it's really fun to talk about, and especially when you ask previous generations the role of pets in their lives. I think it has changed, and there's a whole market for people and services that offer these things. And so, yeah, we do see it. It is linked with participant age, where the younger people are more likely to do these things. But then the question is why? And that's kind of this fascinating thing where, is there something sociological that's changing? Because there's a bunch of things that are changing, like more and more people are living alone, fewer people are getting formally married, more people are having fewer children or no children at all. And, I'll stick by their words. You know, these people said that they were huge and important parts of their lives. So when you think of the function that animals serve in life, naturally then you'll kind of care for them. And sometimes it's reflected in weird ways like celebrating a quinceanera. But then there's other ways in which like pet insurance is probably something that your dad didn't consider either. The fact that your dog would have an HMO, you know, that's not a thing that humans often thought about. But there is a sense in which like you'll see social services shift to caregiving for pets like that. So we do find some demographic characteristics. Interestingly, gender wasn't as big of a predictor as you might assume. So young men and women have a great deal of affection for their pets. But yeah, we should look at a bunch of other correlates because it could be that like single people do this more, or people who just went through a breakup, or maybe people who don't want kids do it more. I will say that people who want kids will often adopt a dog shortly before they have children. Maybe you've also seen this like just before they'll get a puppy. A lot of times that's seen as like a dry run. Can you keep something alive? That's what my friends have told me. So there's a sense in which, yeah, again, pets have this unique position in people's lives, and it's been changing over time from what we see at least. So, yeah, sure.
So as somebody with 2 kids
Okay.
and a dog,
Humans?
Human kids.
Okay.
and a dog.
Okay, good.
Question I had that came up when you were talking about fearfulness was how that was pretty consistent over time. And I had 2 kids, and the reason I mentioned that is that one of the things I noticed was after I had the second child, I noticed things in the first one, or the first one changed in ways in response to the second one coming along, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if your data can speak at all to what happens when the family grows. Like, you know, when you get an additional pet, a cat or a dog, do you see any changes in personality based on that? Or maybe you didn't have enough cases, but I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, we actually had enough cases. So we asked like how many other pets and what the heterogeneity of pet types are. So if you introduce, say, a cat in a dog household. Yeah, so again, part of it with the cross-sectional data, it's really hard to just ascertain those things. So what we know is that they have 2 cats and a dog. We don't really know if like the dog was really affectionate and warm and could warm 2 cats really easily. So, you know, right now we can only evaluate like the presence of multiple pets, and those pets are kind of more calm, friendly, less neurotic, less impulsive. But you know, one cool thing we do have is we have kind of the adoption history and length of ownership. So using just that information, we could like reconstruct the timeline of when pets were adopted. And
when they came in, right?
Exactly. Or, you know, this dog and cat have been living together for 20 years versus 10 years versus like 5 years. And you can start to make some inferences based on that. So that's as close as we can get. But the really cool thing is we have these people's contact information. The data were collected like 5 years ago. What are the odds that some people probably got another cat in the meantime, or another dog, or their family grew with children, or their spouse changed? So yeah, it's a bummer because we don't have the good data, but we can have it in the near future when we can look at that. So, thank you.
Real quick, so this kind of goes back to Jacob's question. I'm wondering if you have looked at data on owner affluence and determined whether there is association, whether we see more variation in things described. And then sort of the second thing, which is sort of, I'm just trying to wrap my head around what could potentially have changed. Another thing, I'm curious if you've looked at the effects of, well, quite frankly, just Instagram and the fact that it becomes really easy to anthropomorphize a pet.
Yeah.
When you also basically command their social media presence.
Yep.
And I'm curious if either of those things have been things you have looked at.
Yeah, we've looked into education and income levels because it was just something we should control for, especially when you're looking at did people get pet insurance and can they reliably take care of the pet? And there are some differences based on that, but then we measured other things like psychological stress, and that was explaining most of the associations. So, you know, at first brush, you see that there's differences, and then it's usually explained by the fact that people are working multiple jobs, and, you know, they struggle with a lot of things in their life. They struggle with work and they struggle with relationships. So yeah, so people across the socioeconomic spectrum have pets, but then yeah, the kind of relationship quality and self-dog human overlap are affected by that. Yeah, the role of social media is interesting because, as an academic, I'd like to think that my work is getting out there, but then, I saw a photo of a dog in a tutu and it had like 20 million likes, and I thought that nothing I will ever do personally will equal the influence of this dog's tutu thing. But, especially because humans can curate, they have the opportunity to present pets to the outside world. There's a sense in which, maybe when I think of, say, Jacob's dad, like there wasn't that kind of presence where it could broadcast and he could get the reward for having the attention of that. So there's a sense in which like part of why anthropomorphism might be changing and why kind of our relationships with pets change might be partially because we're rewarded through kind of broadcasting these things in a way that wasn't present, say, 40 years ago. One thing we do have is we have some online presence measures, like do they have all these various accounts and how much time they spend on social media. So there's a sense in which if that's correlated with like anthropomorphism, that would be consistent with your hypothesis. So the good thing is we have some of that in the cat data, so we can test that out. Yeah.
So speaking as someone who was a zookeeper for a decade before, obviously having a career change, I'm just curious about this type of research in animals who are not dogs or cats. What kind of studies have been done? What does that look like? And also kind of a part B to this question, do you think there are any implications for, say, like animal welfare?
Yeah. So the first one, there's been plenty, and a lot of that research will be focused on assessment, like how do we measure psychological traits? So something like sharks. They're hopefully, on average, a lot of humans aren't in their environments very often. So this is a good test in which there's a lot of species in the animal kingdom that humans don't interact with, and that kind of makes it fascinating, like witnessing in their own habitat without the kind of intervention by humans. How do they function? So a lot of times they'll measure things like sociality. How does it navigate with other animals in the environment? So a lot of it's on that. A lot of it is on kind of like virality and diseases and the progression of those things based on animal behavior, even non-human diseases, kind of how it spreads, effective like ecological environments on animal welfare, so climate change, things like that. But then, so a lot of it is just assessment. And then, like I was telling Dave, there's often this like revelation or discovery that animals are capable of a thing that we didn't kind of know before. So that's that. A lot of it is just kind of trying to characterize and taxonomize how animals behave. And then in terms of animal welfare, there's a few implications because, I mostly study humans. I should have left with that. I mostly study humans, and this is just a corner of the research. But, I think people are naturally curious about like, how do I enhance my relationship with my pet, which might make your life easier. And then also there's just this empathy and compassion for other living beings. So if we had discovered something, and part of that's a good thing with the cat data where we have like all sorts of measures about their environment, where they sleep, how often you feed them wet food, how much you take them to the doctor. So there's a sense in which some of those things are actionable. So the declawing is a good example in which it at least acknowledges that we should look at that as, a big intervention for cats. But the cool thing is, we'll measure at least like 80 to 90 different things, and then you can start to suss out, okay, well, if you wanted to make this really big kind of change or intervention in an animal's life, what's the biggest bang for your buck? So if you think your cat gets sick regularly or is kind of having a bad time or a bad life, the hope is that we can tell you the 4 or 5 things that you could do to enhance its life. So part of it is just, like I told you, people have this stereotype that like people can't influence cats. And then we went through the trouble of actually measuring it to see if that's true. And that's the hope too, is to maybe get some actionable things, to at least give humans the tools so they know like what they could potentially do. So those are, 2 answers.
Okay, I have to ask. So human-animal communication is controversial in terms of how important it is to the folks in this room.
Okay.
But I have a couple thoughts about it. So one is just, did you ask any questions about communication in terms of communicating with the pets maybe? But also, I think especially in the pandemic, we saw Zooming with our colleagues. I met so many of your animals, and it like made you more whole people to me.
It's maybe the best part of Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, yes, right? Yeah,
Sorry.
the only good, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Sorry
And
for
so I think that element of them being part of our world and like being able to see that, but then also they can be very disruptive on Zoom too. So like interrupting communication, disrupting communication. So just wondering if you included any of that, or if you would consider including any of that in the next.
So yeah, we'll for sure consider it. We're working on this really fun project, and it's a little goofy, so stay with me. There's this ear activated recorder. I don't know if you're familiar, maybe where it kind of randomly turns on and off and records your speech. People consent to this. And a lot of times it's like capturing how many people around, how much ambient noise. But this is people at Texas that I was at sabbatical with, and this really funny thing happened where people would say that no humans were their environment, but they nevertheless recorded speech during those times. So we started listening to a few of the tapes, and it turns out they were talking to their pets, and we recorded speech that they were having with their animals. So that's like the literal communication. We know like what they're saying to the pets. And it's an EMA study, but it's unlike most EMA studies that you're familiar with, because there's no reason to expect people talking if there's no other humans around. But like that project is like, no, people talk to themselves too. I'll say that. So yeah, we have actual data on that, on their mood and kind of well-being. We haven't asked a ton about communication. A lot of it is like what humans are doing to pets rather than communicating. But then yeah, I agree. It's yeah, the Zoom thing's an interesting thing, because I think that the modal response is like delight usually when an animal goes on screen. But there's also a sense in which, like, especially cats and dogs, they can be pains in the ass. Like, I need to get work done. Please leave me alone. So there, there's a way in which the perception is like positive, but then, the interruptions and the frustrations when you're trying to communicate with maybe another human, that's very real. And I think, again, I don't mean to like paint this Pollyanna picture of pets. I love pets and animals too, but there is a sense in which they're not like exclusively positive impacts on our lives. And, that's a good example in which they could really be annoying, even though I like to see it. So I never complain when a dog is interrupting a Zoom call. That's the human probably is. Yeah, so we have some data, and yeah, we could measure it in the follow-up too. So.
Okay, I have one more then.
Yeah, please.
The one personality trait, will you just tell us what it is?
Oh my God, yeah. Okay, so I'll whittle it down. So there's 5. Most people think there's 5.
Yeah.
And then there's a group in Minnesota who thinks that there's 2, and it's kind of that reward sensitivity and then plasticity, which is like being malleable to your environment. And then the one trait is what's called the general factor of personality, or the GFP. And then basically they say, look at those 5 traits, and it's just all the good stuff. Just all add that together. You're not anxious, you're nice, you're extroverted, you're a nice person. And like they're saying, like, that's all you really need to know is like, are they kind of positive on all those traits? And it's funny because when you meet people in the world, a lot of times you judge them based on how nice they are, or how exciting they are, or how anxious they are. But there is some truth to that person perception where it's just like, oh, do they have this collection of positive traits? However, like I always default to like, we have these methods to formally examine if factors are distinguishable. And the consensus is that there's been 5. But they say, oh, if you do the factor analysis this way, or if you change the criteria in which you distinguish factors, then it's still 1, or they all correlate. So isn't there just maybe 1 deep down? And they've been fighting about that for 60 years. So yeah, no problem.
Final questions? Well, thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks for everybody. Did you expect that there will be intercultural people? I think so. Yeah, I think it's okay. Although it's really good here. I think the intercultural, especially. Yeah, but then and also when you do the evaluation, right. Yeah, and if people yeah. So that's what I was thinking. I didn't. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, yeah, I think they postponed.